Hey, okay, so what I'm going to do in this video is a really quick demo on how to set up the Tailwind CSS framework to work with any WordPress theme, but in this particular case I'm going to use underscores. Just a word of note, this does use build tools, it does use package managers, so if you don't know what they are, this probably isn't a tool for you. By all means, go and check them out, try and find out what they are, learn what they are. They're really useful tools, but by no means do you need them to build a WordPress or any kind of website. It's just that these tools often make your life easier when you're working at the type of or on the type of projects that require them. So just to bring everyone up to speed, basically where we are now is I have set up a basic WordPress install. It's the latest version of WordPress as of May 25th, 2019. So it's still version 5.0 point something. I also have downloaded a vanilla version of underscores from the underscores website. The only things I've changed is that I've used the advanced options to add my name and my email address to it, but that's pretty much it. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go into VS Code here, and I am going to change the directory that we are in. So because we're in a regular WordPress install, we need to go to WP content. Just going to double check where we are. Yeah, WP content, and then we're going to go to themes, and we're going to go to the Tailwind, the underscores theme that I created, which I called WP Tailwind. So we are now in the correct directory. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open this here and go into here, and we can see that there is no package.json file, there is no anything else in there. So what I'm going to do, the first thing that we want to do is we obviously want to install Tailwind. So I'm going to be using Yarn. You can use npm to do this if you want. Syntax is pretty similar. Yarn add is npm install, and realistically that is all that we will be using in this tutorial. So if you would prefer to use npm, by all means just substitute yarn add for npm install. What we're going to do is we're going to add Tailwind CSS, and all that is at the end is saying that we're going to set it as a development dependency, because we're not really going to use it in production. We will be compiling the framework down to CSS files, which we will deploy. Now, if you want to build on the server after you've deployed, you can set it as a regular dependency, and then it will be available for when you run your build tools on the server. However, typically I tend to deploy compiled assets. So let's give this a run. And after a couple of seconds, we should now see we now have a package.json file. We also have a node modules file, and we also have a yarn lock file. You'd also have a package.lock file instead of yarn lock if you used npm. Okay. So now that we've installed Tailwind, the next thing that we need to install is a tool that we can use to build it. Now, there's a couple of options out there. Probably the oldest and the one that most people are familiar with is Grunt. There is also Gulp. I used to use both of those. I now don't use either of those. I now tend to use a tool called laravel-mix. Don't be fooled by the name. Even though it has Laravel in it, you can use it with your WordPress website. It is basically a wrapper for Webpack, which is another build tool. It's a very complicated build tool to use. Definitely not one to start with anything that you would otherwise normally do. In terms of build tools, unless you were using JavaScript. So what we are going to do is take this and we'll run yarn add laravel-mix, and again we'll set that as a development dependency. Take a minute to install. And as soon as it's done, what we will do is we'll go into our theme folder and we'll create a new file which is called webpack.mix.js. And this is the file that we will use to basically tell Mix what to do. So if you've never used Require.js, this might be a little bit new to you. If you've used Gulp, think of it as, you know, where you require different Gulp plugins to run things. And all we're going to do is we're just going to use ES6 syntax const. You can use var if you wanted to, but I'll just be using const. And we'll set it up to say mix. Mix is the key that we want to use, and we'll say laravel-mix. And when we define that key, all that means is that we can say mix dot, and then whatever the methods are available within it. So typically the one that you're going to use would be things like mix.js, mix.sass, mix.less if you wanted to. I'm going to use PostCSS in this just because that's typically what I use, and to be honest, with a couple of plugins, you get 90% of what you actually need out of Sass, and because we are not going to be using things like mixins and things, there's really no point in using Sass within it. So all we want to do is we want to pass through the method, which, as I said, is PostCSS. Like I said, if you wanted to use Sass, you could literally do that. If you wanted to use less, it's that. Okay. And in every instance, you would take it accepts two arguments. Okay. The first is where the source file is, so the file that we're going to compile from, and the second one is where we want it to go. So this file doesn't exist right now, but based on how I would normally do it, I'm going to put it into resources, CSS, and then a file called app.css, and then I want it to output to a file called app.css. And all this dot in front of the / is basically saying I want it to be in the same directory that Webpack is in. And because Webpack is in WP Tailwind, it means it will output the file css / app.css into this folder. Now, there is one other thing that we need to do, which is we just need to basically tell it to use or where it can expect Tailwind's config file to be. So before we do that, what we need to do is we need to add Tailwind to or tell Webpack where to find Tailwind. So again, it's TailwindCSS. You can call it whatever. If you wanted to call it TW, TWCSS, it doesn't matter, just as long as you know what you've called it. We will then run TailwindCSS. So it's whatever the this is equal to this, and then we want to pass in where the config will be, and it doesn't exist right now, but it will be tailwind.config.js. And because it's Saturday morning, I am just going to double check and make sure that is actually 100% correct. So I'm just going to open up another project that we are using it in. Okay, so let's see. Webpack. This is not a WordPress theme or WordPress site, by the way, but obviously the general gist it's the same. It's also got a lot of other stuff, so don't worry. But yep, that is correct. So that's pretty much what we need to do for that. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up our JavaScript. And in the same vein, we're going to say resources JS app.js, and we want to output it to js/app.js. And because we don't need to do anything else with this, we can just close it straight off. If you were using Webpack or you wanted to use some of the functionality of Webpack, you could add, again, an opening object and pass through any parameter or any config options that you want to actually set. So this is literally all you need to be able to compile with laravel-mix to get Tailwind to work. So what we're going to do now is let's clear that out. The next step is that we need to create a config file. So what we're going to do is we're going to go yarn, and we're going to go node modules bin. It's actually .bin and Tailwind init, and we'll say tailwind.config.js. Now I might need to add a flag to this, I'm not sure, so let's see if it works. Yep. Is it because it's meant to be TailwindCSS? No. When in doubt, check the manual. Tailwind.css. Install. Documents are really good with this, so let's just quickly find. Okay, they've changed this, haven't they? Let me just check what my one was. So the tutorial that's on my site is actually an older version of Tailwind, so it's not 100% up to date, but it should have the correct node modules init Tailwind. Weird, that should have worked. Okay, that worked. That time it did work. Node modules .bin /tailwind init. Not sure why that wasn't working in the past, but basically all we're doing is we're logging into this particular path, into this folder, running the init function, and then giving it a name of what to call the file, which will generate this file. Okay, so you can see it's pretty empty. Pre-version 1, Tailwind would give you the full config file. Now it just gives you a set of options. If you want, if you go to the Tailwind website, there is a default config file. If you just go to this, go to installation, and just do a quick search for default config. Where is it? Let's look the old-fashioned way. Unless they might have removed it. Alright, let's leave it for the time being, and what I'll do is I'll come back to that in a second. So, you will, however, need to, well, you don't need to, but I would advise adding a script, which if you go to my website, which is just benfurphy.co.uk, and find the Tailwind tutorial, there is a section here in steps 2, you'll see a script, scripts.dev, development, etc., etc. If you just take that out, if you open up your package.json file, add a comma after dev dependencies, and just add this, get rid of that last trailing comma, and just Let's tab that out. Let's just make it a little bit neater. And we now, all this just basically means is that we can then run yarn or npm dev or npm run dev. So it's not super complicated. You don't need to know what's going on here. If you're on Windows, this won't work. You will need to add a small additional config. I will add that to the updated version on my tutorial, but this is very much assuming that you are on a Mac or Linux. So we want to now go to the theme folder. The next thing that we need to do is we need to, so you'll remember how in here we created or added this path. We now just need to create those files. So let's create a new folder, resources, CSS, app.css. And within resources, we'll then create a new one called js.app.js. Okay. And from this, we will want to add TailwindCSS to your site. Just add those. Let's just close those up because I prefer it to be tidier. And then if we run yarn dev, we'll see what happens. It'll take a while to install. This might break. If it does, I'll show you how to debug it. So just giving it a second. And it takes a little while on the first time it runs through DevNote. It's actually generated, which means that we have done everything that we need to. So if we actually now look in app.css, we look here, we will see, yep, we've got all of our Tailwind CSS classes. So just as a really, really quick thing, let's go into functions and let's just find, here we go. Right, so we want to get rid of this. So let's just replace style sheet URI with template directories so we can actually define the file. I'll say css.app.css. You can call that whatever you want as long as it matches the file name that you've defined in your CSS and in laravel-mix. And the only other thing that we want to do is we just want to take from the very, very top of table contents and just go through and basically what I would suggest is cutting it, saving that, and then creating maybe a temporary file, oldstyles.css, which obviously you wouldn't want to compile, but it's just there for if you need to go through and recreate any of these particular styles. What you probably want to do is use Tailwind's settings to basically do that, and what I'll do is I'll show you one or two really, really quick ones. So now that we've got that out of the way, the reason why we delete all this is that we do not want the styles conflicting with it. And if we go here, you'll see in theory we now have a functioning Tailwind CSS website. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go to GitHub Tailwind CSS, because in theory default config, there is default, here we go, right. So if you go to the Tailwind project on GitHub, there is a default config file, and is it in stubs? Yes, here we go. Right. So Tailwind CSS stubs default config. What I would do, or what I personally do, is open it in raw, copy it, go to my Tailwind CSS file, and just paste it in. Now, all this stuff is default, so it's already there. You're effectively redefining it, but what I find quite useful, especially while you're getting used to Tailwind, is having the Tailwind config file there so you can actually just open it up and, you know, sort of see what the values are. You know, being a Brit, one of the first things I do is change grey to the correct spelling. No, just joking. But I'm so used to typing grey the other way. You know, you've got your colours, your spacing. Another one of the ones that I typically do is I will add 15, which is one down from that, so it's 3.75 rem. And as long as you are basically amending it in that sense, that's all fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run a different script function called yarn watch, and what this will do is it'll just basically keep an eye on all the files and folders that you want to be able to basically watch it. So in theory, given this a second just to do this, if I now go to add an additional one, let's say we want to add 14. Okay, well 14 will be 3.5. I'll just click that, save, and you'll see that it automatically starts recompiling it, which is perfect. So let's come back here, and you can see now it's all fine. If we wanted to, say for example, change the font stack, what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to go into it's this file, so it has this. Trying to think, template parts. I haven't used WordPress and underscores for quite a while, so you have to forgive me. It's in the header. You've got body classes, and what we'll do is we'll just pass into body class a couple of additional classes, which are our default Tailwind ones. So we want to add font sans, which all this does is just basically says we want the font sans stack. I'm going to set the text grey 900 because black isn't really great, and then I'm going to basically set it up as anti-aliased. And all this does is on a Mac, it just makes sure that the text is a little bit nicer. And if we check, we can see it's really subtle, but it has actually, it's reduced the font weight, it's set it to a slightly different font. Now, if we wanted to see what happens here, we can come all the way down to where the font families are defined. So you can see sans, serif, mono, and let's say we wanted to add, because what the hell, Comic Sans. I'm not even sure if I actually have this on my system, so it might not render. But just give it a second. It's done. Refresh. Nope, I do not have Comic Sans on my computer. That was a really bad example. What was a font that we do definitely have? In fact, actually, let's just change it to Menlo. Even though Menlo isn't a sans, it is a very different font, so it will give us a very clear idea. We can see that it's built. Hey presto, you can see it's changed very, very clearly. Just getting rid of that and bringing it back into line, saving it, waiting for the Laravel build notification to come through, and as soon as it does, we can refresh the website. Yeah. And hey presto, it's back to normal. So that is how to set up Tailwind for a basic WordPress underscore powered theme. If there's anything you're not sure about, pop it in the comments, and I will do my best to help you out. All right.